Good morning and welcome to Hard Lens Media Radio, broadcasting live from Q4 Radio, 1680 AM in Chicago. I'm Lainey Peterson, and all of my co-hosts are in the studio this week for the first time in a while. Yeah, we got Kit Cabello, Paul DuPont, Daniel Lepker, and Fernando Tirado. Lucky 13, folks. Show number 13, and we are so grateful to the powers that be that offer us so much to support on this week. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan, employer rights, Sheriff Joe, but first the big story is hurricane down in Texas, Harvey.
Hurricane Harvey. So Hurricane Harvey hit a peak of Category 4. It's currently still a Category 1 hurricane basically in the Galveston, Corpus Christi area of southern Texas. And it's bad. We're going to have a lot of damage and a lot of aftermath from this. Trump has already declared a disaster, and we'll have federal funding going toward relief efforts there in the future, but there's not a whole lot to say about it at this point other than it's bad. It's one of the worst hurricanes we've had in years.
Yeah, and I also know I was looking at the Weather Channel this morning, and what they said was, okay, the hurricane is one thing, but then it's the rains that come after that and the flooding. And I can tell folks, I mean, I've never always lived in the Midwest, never dealt with a hurricane, but I can tell you that the aftermath of flooding does not go away anytime soon. I was living in Park Ridge at a time where there was badly managed water in the area, and it took people weeks and months to recover from the flooding situation. So we're going to have to see how this administration responds. Those of us who remember Hurricane Katrina, so we'll see what happens.
But we'll
here.
see the master management skills of Trump in action. So I've seen a bit of footage of it. It looks like there is very extensive damage. I mean, this hurricane, usually hurricanes, they start moving, similar how you see tornadoes, they'll move. This one is more or less hovering over the coast of Texas, so it's been, they've delayed how fast they can get emergency services out. And in addition to that, this hurricane is in an area, so like Lenny was mentioning with flooding, I saw a few pictures of in rural where there's like cattle pastures. All the pastures around this area I saw was just completely flooded. It looked like a lake. And especially since there's so little vegetation here, we live in the Midwest, we have a lot of vegetation everywhere. But it's in Texas, they don't have a lot of, the earth itself doesn't want to absorb the water that's being laid down like you would with a lot of plant matter. So it's they're going to have a lot of trouble getting rid of all this water.
You're talking about a 12-foot rain surge. It's crazy.
And 3 feet of rain.
What concerns me, though, is as this flood, apparently there's supposedly, 3 feet of water flooding that's supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. How's this? What's the long-term effect in regards to the safe drinking water that's in the towns that are being affected?
They've actually were told when it started to boil their water.
Yeah, and there's another thing, too, that we have to take into account. Since the Trump administration is anti-science at this point and is basically ignoring any types of talk about climate change or any kind of data in regards to climate change itself. I'm hoping that there are some scientists that are observing this hurricane. Is this the new normal? Like, we're going to be dealing with these large hurricanes, especially in the south and on the East Coast, because if this is the case, this could put our entire country and the individual states in huge financial debt in regards to reconstruction.
I want to ask everyone here, just because I'm not aware, isn't this the start of hurricane season? Not the middle, not the end, the start?
It's the beginning, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, this is the beginning?
Beginning of hurricane season, yeah.
Wow.
It goes through most of the fall. I mean, I know usually by the time you get toward the end of November through December, it's kind of dwindled out.
And there's also the issue of, as Daniel pointed out, that removing that water, that leads to mold growth. And you've got all kinds of stuff, nasty stuff growing around, and that can really affect anybody, but particularly people with asthma or autoimmune disorders. And we know, for example, that it is not asthma can be more common in people of lower income who don't really have the resources to combat the mold, don't have the air purifiers, don't have the ability to necessarily move, and when you combine that with lack of access to medical care, these natural disasters are shall we say, the gift that keeps on giving.
Right.
If you don't have the resources to recover, you're going to have an even more difficult time.
Another issue, Trump at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, he has no one in charge of FEMA, as well as he doesn't have anyone in charge of the EPA in that department in regards to dealing with natural disasters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. So I'm pretty sure the FEMA, he hasn't put anyone in. It's going to be interesting because at least Bush had someone that didn't have that much experience or
Brownie.
know-how.
But he had somebody.
He did a heck of a job
there.
Someone was answering the phone at least.
Okay, that's not good, and we really send our condolences and support to the people of Texas. And here's hoping that they all pull through this and that no one's hurt. But this is a devastating hurricane, and we need to just have them all in our minds and help out in any way we can.
And really quick before we move on, if you know someone that's going through this, get in contact with us. We'd love to hear their story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So wait, I'm looking into this real quick. I just want to... It looks like we do have a FEMA administrator, a guy named Brock Long. I'm just following up because we were talking about that, who do we have in positions. I don't know if we have anyone in EPA in this particular category. It was Tom Bossert, Trump's Homeland Security advisor, and then the Texas governor that were requesting the disaster declaration on Friday. And they got it. Okay. So, I mean, I think we're going to bumble through it, but...
We'll see. We'll just have to wait and see and report next week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a very big story last night, but there were a bunch of other big stories that came out, and one is the fact that Trump has decided to pardon Joe Arpaio. And for those, also known as Sheriff Joe, for those of you who are listening and are not familiar with who this man is, he is he was a sheriff of Maricopa County in Arizona, and he openly admitted to running the most the most difficult, the most challenging county jail anywhere. Inmates were required to wear pink uniforms. They were housed in tents. Now, you have to understand, this is Arizona. This is the desert. So they were not put into an air-conditioned facility. They were put out in tents. They were fed green bologna, and he bragged of spending more money on dog food for the guard dogs than he did on the prisoners. That all made the headlines, but a lot of other things happened there. People died. There were people who died there. There was a case where a deputy nearly broke the neck of somebody who was paraplegic and needed a catheter. People were humiliated. He also was involved in the birther movement. He apparently at one point wanted to send a deputy, or may have done so, out to Hawaii to investigate President Obama's birth certificate. And this man showboated his way to prominence among so-called conservatives who thought that this was just fine. Now, I want to point something else here before we open this up to discussion. This is a county jail. Now, people do go to jail after they've been convicted of a crime that doesn't require a lengthy incarceration. They will go to jail rather than to prison. But there are a lot of people who are in jail who have not been convicted of anything. These are people who have been charged with a crime and who have not been able to post bail, who can't post bail. So you have this incredibly punitive system that this man created for people who technically are not supposed to even be being punished at this point. And people have been complaining about this man for a very long time. He's been very open with the media. Nothing has been done. When finally something was done, President Trump has decided to pardon him.
You know what really annoys me about this? So how many police do we see shooting innocent people and not even a grand jury trial comes up? The prosecutors decide that we've investigated ourselves and we find that we're innocent. How hard is it on top of that to get people that are on top in the hierarchy of those police officers to ever face any amount of accountability? Here you have one of the only people in the U.S. who has successfully been prosecuted as a authority figure, really as a general rule, and he's pardoned.
Yeah, well, this is I blame a little bit of corporate media for covering him and making a big sensation story. to where he was brought to the attention of people like Trump or the extreme right-wing conservatives. This is a disaster in many ways, because now people cannot trust any form of checks and balances. I mean, this man clearly put people through humiliating trials. And by trials, I mean basically when they were in prison, making them eat green bologna, having to wear pink jumpsuits, and countless other disasters in regards to people even dying in his own little prison tent camp that he had. So I'm not surprised that Trump would do something like this. But I wonder what the rest of the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and House are going to think about this, because it's quite clear that the sheriff broke the law.
What is particularly disturbing to me is that Sheriff Arpaio was convicted of contempt of court because he'd been ordered to stop racially profiling Latinos in his area, ignored this and just went forward with it. Now we are still dealing with the ramifications of what happened in Charlottesville. There have been other rallies and such that have gone on or that have been canceled, but there's a huge amount of racial and ethnic tension right now going on, and this man was convicted of ignoring a court order to stop racially profiling, and Donald Trump decides to pardon him in the midst of all this.
Well, that's the kind of person Donald Trump is. He's someone who survives and thrives off of not only people fighting against each other, but he loves to watch it. This is the kind of man he is, and no one should be surprised on how he acts towards it. So, of course, he was going to pardon him. He was going to do it. And I don't know who in his advisors, hopefully there were some people that said, please don't do this, now's a bad time. But you know what? I don't think anyone there really has a backbone, including some of his key chief advisors. It's just, I don't know how they can really say no to this guy, because he's going to do what he wants, and I think he really wants to see something happen. He didn't say anything to the Klan. He didn't say anything to the neo-Nazis. He's going to pardon this sheriff, and he's going to keep on pushing the button. And I think what he wants is to see people fight each other. I think that's what he loves to do.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. Yeah. But one of the things we have to not shy away from is this is Trump very explicitly putting his stamp, rubber stamping, racial profiling. Yeah. And this is in lockstep with his campaign rhetoric and what his supporters almost expect out of him. And with regard
not
to the
almost.
time, it's exactly in line.
All of them. You might as well just say all of them. This is what they wanted.
With regard to the timing, a lot of people are noting that, this is a late Friday announcement, which is when you announce things that you don't want people to talk about or scrutinize very much. You want people to be going out, Friday night to the bar and not be worried about news and politics. And boy, it coincided with this big old hurricane. How wonderful. There will be something else everyone's talking about.
And we know from corporate media, they have a very long-term memory. They're going to get to this, and they're going to do full coverage a week from now once things... No, they're not.
No, corporate media will never do it. Corporate media is going to cover the hurricane.
The hurricane has better ratings, so that's the story.
I don't know about that. I think this hits on intersectional politics pretty well. I think you'll see MSNBC will want to do this, because that really falls into the sort of the Democratic Party, like, oh, look, there's racial profiling. They'll talk about it.
Independent media will talk about this, of course. It's just corporate media. ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, CNN. They're going to talk about for a few minutes and then walk away.
Yeah, it's not going to be a sustained story.
And then, of course, you also had the supposed resignation, or the departure of Sebastian Gorka, who was considered to be one of the more flagrant, if racist, pretty much on that staff there. He has left behind a pretty remarkable so-called resignation letter, where he said that he could best serve MAGA outside of the people's house, as he put it. And that all happened at the same time as well. And it's almost as if everything is being designed to cause maximum outrage but confusion at the same time. And then you're saying, well, Gorka, who was considered to be particularly dangerous or an individual, has left, but Donald Trump has also pardoned this sheriff who flagrantly disregarded an order to stop racially profiling. This can really, I think, muddy the waters for people who are trying to make sense of everything that's going on, particularly when you have other waters coming in to Texas right now.
Yeah.
And people are concerned about friends and family members and the ramifications of what this new administration will do to handle this situation.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is, think about for many people that don't follow news very, very much. They're going to have on their plate right now simultaneously like 18 different stories of values that they're not going to fully understand because they haven't been told about it. They don't have good coverage of it. A lot of this is going to be, maybe it's the sheriff, maybe it's something else. A lot of this is just going to be swept under the rug just because that's how corporate news covers things. It's taking advantage of their own system, which Trump is really fantastic at doing. He knows how to play the media like a fiddle. And like I've always looked at it, it's a reality TV show star that knows the tricks and talents of a reality TV, and he's just applying them to presidency.
And he's also using the American people as the audience so they can be outraged or curious to what he's going to do next. But there's always consequences and repercussions because sooner or later, Trump is right now on the high ground. He is just trotting along. No one is talking about impeaching him. He's not facing any consequences. But I always remember this one quote: "You are your own worst enemy. No one can do you in like you can do yourself in." And sooner or later, Trump is going to slip and fall face first, and we are all going to really suffer for it because, remember, there's an economy that still hasn't fully recovered. There's this deal with climate change, and there's so many other national issues within our country that we have to deal with, and this is just a perfect storm that is bubbling, and sooner or later it's going to affect us all. And I don't know if we can keep on going forward with this and just one day just bracing for ourselves for the big hit, but Donald Trump is just, he's very lucky right now, but it will run out.
Well, speaking of running out, it sounds like the Secret Service is running out of money in its attempt to protect our president and his family and their travel and all that. And it's always fascinating to me about when we look at cases like this and with Sheriff Arpaio, who I guess his department had to pay out a lot of money to victims of his cruelty, that there's always money to pay out victims to keep them quiet. There's oftentimes money to protect extended family members of politicians, but you want a kid to have a lunch at school, and we start wringing our hands. But any case, so what's going on with the Secret Service situation? How did they end up in this predicament?
Well, Trump, as he said during the campaign to Obama, can't take any vacations. I won't take vacations. And so Trump has taken more vacations than anyone. And that costs a lot of money because the Secret Service has to continually travel, redeploy their resources. On top of what Lainey said, they also have to protect all of his properties, which are many, and they simply don't have the budget to pay their employees, the Secret Service members, to do so. So they're getting, I believe, like partial checks right now, or they're not getting full overtime compensation. So that's really great for morale. I mean, what do you know?
It's wonderful for morale. And, I'm not necessarily crazy about the idea. My feelings about the administration aside, I don't want anything to happen to the president or his family. I genuinely don't. That is not good for the country. And I would kind of like to have the Secret Service detail assigned to them to be in the best frame of mind possible.
Yeah.
So this is not good for security.
There's something that we need to take into account, too. And Daniel and I were talking about this earlier before the show, where the Secret Service were actually kicked out of Trump Tower because they couldn't pay the bill. So they were kicked out, and they had to relocate their headquarters.
They had offices there, yeah.
Yeah, they had offices there. But if being prior military, look, you got to keep your troops in morale, and this is like in high morale. And the fact that there's talk of low morale, lack of resources and funds and money going to the Secret Service, I can't help but think of the ancient Roman Praetorian Guard, where there were good Roman emperors, and then there were bad Roman emperors, and for the bad Roman emperors, 90% of the time, they were done in by their own guardsmen. So, I mean, or either that, their guardsmen just didn't care when the emperor was under attack. And the best example would be Caligula, who treated his Praetorian guards like servants. Same way how Trump is treating the Secret Service. There's talk of people saying that he is treating them like they're servants. And you just don't do that. Yes, you're the commander-in-chief, don't make your guardsmen angry, okay? Don't make your security guards angry.
Anybody who has ever seen I, Claudius, and if you haven't, you really do need to get it from Netflix. It describes the situation very, very well.
Oh, yes. It was a great series.
Yeah, I just want to add that, so part of where this money is going, just to give a little extra context, is like, for example, they're paying, I believe, $60,000 to rent golf carts from Trump. So you have to remember, a lot of this money is going to Trump's pocket because he's charging them exorbitant rates to just cover Turks. It's, I don't know, that's just weird. It's like, hey, I have this free security. Let me just charge them on everything double the price I charge everything else. It's just not going to work out well, but it's great for short-term pocket spending.
So on that same vein, the $60,000 in golf carts for the Secret Service, there is a kind of a silly website out there called TrumpGolfCount.com.
Oh, no.
He's made 55 trips to the golf course. They can only confirm he actually was golfing on 23 of those, but the cost to the taxpayer so far has been $62 million and plus.
Very fiscally conservative.
That's like how much we spend on food stamps almost.
Well, that's a disaster. But let's look at a little bright story. And it's actually here in the city of Chicago. And let's look at Emanuel critics, CPS principal Troy Lavery. I hope I'm saying that last name correct.
It's a hard one. Lavery.
Lavery. But he is exploring a mayoral run. Now, if you all don't remember him, during the last election between Chuy Garcia and Mayor Emanuel, Troy was a supporter of Chuy Garcia, and in 2016, he was also a huge supporter of then presidential candidate during the primaries, Bernie Sanders. And he's been very critical of Rahm Emanuel, specifically of him shutting down the schools. And for the past 6 years, he doesn't have a real plan, or at least Mayor Emanuel does not have a plan in regards to fixing Chicago and making sure that all of the communities are working properly. So he's exploring a mayoral run in 2019. And he wants to really get the city to reinvest into the communities, and not just downtown, but to all the communities, especially in the west side and south side communities, which have really suffered a lot due to the school closings as well as the lack of resources there to rebuild the neighborhoods. So he's basically saying that he's not your normal politician, and everybody who's running isn't saying it, and he's saying he's not running it either. He hasn't fully made a decision, but there are people who are calling for him to run and to stand up. So hopefully we will get a full answer from him in regards to whether or not he will effectively run. But he's exploring this idea, and he's a former United States Navy veteran, so that's pretty interesting. I'm a former United States Marine Corps, so the Marine Corps is with the Navy, so I have to definitely give a huge shout out to him. Well done. But at the end of the day, what we need to take into account is that Mayor Emanuel is not popular here in Chicago. He has done a lot of damage, especially if you've all heard us cover this before in regards to the TIF funds, how he's basically taking all the resources away from the low-income neighborhoods and basically investing into downtown as well as some other affluent neighborhoods to beautify them and make them look great, all the while the communities are suffering and the schools being shut down.
You can almost say he's making Chicago great again.
Yeah, he's making Chicago great for the top 1%, but the people, the lifeblood, are being ignored. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen during the next mayoral election run here in the city of Chicago. So we're going to follow through on this story and definitely make sure to give all of you the true facts about what's going to happen, and to basically make your decision in 2019 about who you want to vote, or who do you want to be mayor of Chicago, because it's going to get intensified very shortly.
So
absolutely.
I'm curious, real quick question on this. This Principal Lavery was ousted as a principal in April of last year.
Yes.
Was it by Emanuel?
It was probably most likely by CPS. Remember, the thing is, he was very outspoken and critical about Mayor Emanuel as well as Hillary Clinton during the March primary here in Illinois.
Right.
For all of you who may not remember, during the primary in 2016, Hillary Clinton actually said that Rahm Emanuel is doing a good job. She said that. And that was after he shut down the schools. And it was just, I guess this is the way the corporate media was handling the primaries at the time. It was like, well, why are you against Rahm Emanuel? Why are you against Hillary Clinton?
So you think it was like playing politics that ultimately got him pushed out of his position as a school principal?
Well, Democrats never play politics.
Yeah. Well, it
especially
happened.
not in Chicago.
It happened, but there's clear consequences, and if you're going to be an elected official and not do your job and not do a good job and shut down schools and make low-income communities impoverished, well, of course people are going to stand up, and there's going to be people who are going to want to run to office to do a job that you can't do. So we're going to follow through with this story, like I said, and we will give you more updated facts as the story progresses.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kit.
No problem.
All right, another big story this week. Troop escalations in Afghanistan.
We have an unknown number of troops will be escalated. So the early talk was around 4,000, but when the actual order went through, it was an undisclosed number. Back to Trump's, we don't want to give away our strategy type way of thinking and announcing things. I think this is sort of strange, and it dovetails with a number of other stories that have fallen in the news in the last few weeks, months. And there've been other quiet troop escalation elsewhere. I think this. So first of all, we in our troop surge in Afghanistan under Obama, it really didn't accomplish much of anything. That's an entanglement that we've been in for 15 plus years and had no end in sight. And this is sort of a testament to. Boy, wars of counterinsurgency are extremely difficult / we never ever win them because I don't think you can. But also, the troop surge this time appears to be so much smaller than it was last time. So it's like, wait, you're taking the same strategy that we did last time that didn't work, but like not trying as hard as it. Like that's going to work.
It's like, what's the thing called when you what is it, microdosing on whatever, where you take something and you like water it down by 1,000 times.
Homeopathic?
Thank you.
Homeopathy, yes.
Here's what people need to take into account. In 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan. That was way back in 2001. This is now 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Osama bin Laden is dead. He's gone. The main enemy. The Taliban have been disbanded. Yes, there are some insurgent groups in Afghanistan, but the method of which we've been doing this for the past years has led to nothing but a complete disaster. We've only created more victims, and there's going to be a point to where, like, there was an Onion article that Paul mentioned off the radio show, where the headline says, "Son is looking forward to taking over his father's patrol route." And it's like it's pretty sad when you think about it. There's going to be a whole generation of kids who will be serving in the military when perhaps maybe their parents did or their brothers did. In
the same war that we were fighting when they were born.
Yes.
Getting close to that. Getting close.
It's great. I always remember they have this one-use grenade launcher that has tracking. It's when you shoot, you can be tracked as you shoot it. And the saying goes, we are happy to pay $50,000 for a one-use weapon shot by a guy that makes $25,000 a year at a guy who makes $25 a month, misses and uses another one, and then maybe gets him but can't confirm the kill. We're happy to spend money on an army that maybe has in most areas. I know ISIL is a bit of a little bit different, but for the most part, we're fighting a pickup truck and 5 guys in a 10-mile region with millions and millions of dollars of heavy weapons.
But we can't have free college. We cannot reinvest into our infrastructure. We cannot have public schools. We cannot have raise the minimum wage. We can't do that. The military-industrial complex has to keep on humming along.
And I'd like to add, this is the same war that Britain fought when they were fighting the U.S. with George Washington. This is the same war that we fought when we went against Vietnam, because you can't shoot an ideology. You can shoot a standing army. If they had a standing army, we would obliterate. If they had an organized country like Iraq, we would obliterate it with no issue, second to none. But you can't shoot an ideology.
You almost you forgot the one important thing. This is the same location, same kind of war, too, that the Soviets did in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And they had a grand army of 100,000 men with tanks, helicopters, airplanes, and everything. And they still lost.
And on top of that, the way that these counterinsurgents are fighting us is how we trained them, or their predecessors, to fight the Russians. Because we trained them to do guerrilla warfare in a way that large powers couldn't take down. Those type of strategies are what we taught them, and now they're being utilized against us. And like Kit said, the Russians had a much larger presence.
Yeah, they had 100,000
Afghanistan
men.
was their Vietnam to a big extent. And here we are making the same mistakes. And it makes me question after all these years, is it really? Can you say it's a mistake? Because a mistake is like, oops, this is a bad strategy, let's readjust. A mistake isn't, okay, let's just keep doing this and spend trillions of dollars doing
I think the goal is to spend the money.
Yeah, the goal is to spend the money, but there's no win. There's no victory. There's
no. Boeing is doing phenomenal.
All right, that's the win. Is that Raytheon and
it's not like World War II where you have the final surrender of Nazi Germany or the Empire of Japan. It's never going to happen. There's not going to be that big celebration where it says the war is over finally.
You can't win the war on terror because you can't defeat a noun.
Yes.
Nope.
I've been saying for years we need to stop declaring war on nouns.
Yeah. War on drugs, war on poverty, war on terrorism, it's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm also looking here at something that's been brought up over the past several years is that Afghanistan has a lot of mineral wealth.
Mineral wealth and also a lot of poppy fields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got to have that opium.
That we're defending, of course.
Yeah.
It's,
and that we're addicted to right now. The United States population currently has an opioid addiction.
But to Laney's point, we've been talking about extracting those rare earth minerals for our own benefit. Basically, hey, we're going to take your resources because...
New York Times recent article reports in 2010, American officials estimated that Afghanistan had untapped mineral resources worth about $1 trillion.
Yeah, and what's interesting on top of that, I read recently that North Korea has about $4 trillion in untapped resources.
I believe it.
I believe it too, but is it worth the risk to incite a nuclear war with a very hostile power?
Yeah. It's just very fascinating how we spend our money as a country. Like Kit said earlier, it's like, what was... Kit, you probably know the speech by Eisenhower about for every gun you make.
For every missile that is launched, for every gun that is made, for every tank that is created, we are taking food away from a starving child's mouth, a book away from a hungry-minded student, and we are shutting down schools for the populace. I think that's how it goes. But basically, the gist of the quote was saying that the more we spend on war, the less we spend on our own people. And wars cost money. That's the one thing you need.
Can anyone else remind me what we're spending money on in the U.S. right now, 50, 60, 70 years later after that speech, and what we're not spending money on? It seems to be we're spending money on missiles. I remember when all the corporate media was just like, I've never seen them that happy when those cruise missiles got launched.
Yeah,
and the Tomahawk missiles on Syria, the airstrip.
All I said was there goes $125 million to do enough damage that the airfield came back the next day.
Yeah, that was useless.
And another thing, too, to take into account, here in the United States, most of our entire money is spent on the military-industrial complex, while everything else is just receives the bare amount of dollars. And another thing to take into account, globally combined, like there's 10 nations that come close to how we combining their military combining their military defense spending, they barely come close to what we spend.
And like 9 of them are our allies.
Yeah, 9 of them are our allies. Of course, Russia and China are in there too. But you add Russia and China, even when you add in Russia and China, they still barely match the same amount of money that we spend. That's them. All these nations combined together for their military defense spending.
I want to look at this from a slightly different angle because I think it's easy for us. We come at this from the sort of the left. Right. And that's it's nothing new that those of us on the further left are kind of anti-war. We want to get out of these entanglements. We see that there are problems with the way that we're spending this money and that we've incentivized this military-industrial complex. And we've covered that ad nauseum. But there is sort of the less vocal anti-war right. And I think this ties in with last week's story. We were talking about Steve Bannon being ousted from the White House, because this troop escalation is announced right after that, right after Bannon is out. And for as awful as Bannon is, and rhetorically, and for how I don't agree with any of the foundation of his reasoning, he actually was an anti-interventionist. He wanted to get out and disentangle ourselves in Afghanistan. And he's running a bunch of stories on Breitbart this week, basically saying this escalation in Afghanistan falls on the shoulders of Trump supporters because we elected him into office because he told us he was going to get out of these entanglements in Afghanistan, and look at what he's doing.
I don't think that...
And he's been replaced. Like, his cabinet is being filled up by current and former generals. I mean, we've got John Kelly is now chief of staff, right?
Yep.
And McMaster is really the person being tagged as the point person in the whole Afghanistan situation. There were reports that Donald Trump was not aware that Afghanistan was one, say, pretty modern country, McMaster showed him pictures of women in miniskirts back in the 60s, and now McMaster is also saying that they want a sustainable outcome in Afghanistan. They don't want to make it. They want Afghanistan to be its own country. They don't want to duplicate what we're doing in the U.S. over there. But I'm not buying.
We want it to be its own country. That's why we're going to invade it and then maintain our version of what they should do.
But Bill's absolutely correct. I mean, there has long been this anti-war right that have always been very critical of what they call the neoconservatives. Or the hawkish conservatives, but the paleo-conservatives, including people like Pat Buchanan, for example, have always been very reticent to toss troops into war. And again, they may have ideologically they may be different, but I think in many cases they do see the folly of continuously trying to impose values on other countries. And if you're thinking about people who might be, for example, philosophically very conservative, the idea of imposing so-called democratic ideals in other countries is going to rankle that person who is philosophically very conservative.
I'll take a stab at trying to articulate that ideology. I can't say that I'll get it perfectly right. Mm-hmm. But this type of isolationist type thinking sort of stems from, we need to have a look at our own domestic liberties as they're, being under attack. And we're anti-globalist, right? We don't want our jobs being shipped overseas. We don't want... And these are pretty good tenets. We don't want to have these trade policies that hurt the American citizenry. The end conclusion that I think a lot of people get to from that foundational political philosophy, unfortunately, yields Aleppo moments. If you're going to be so disengaged with world affairs that you don't even know what's going on, that's a problem for world leaders, and that's something that Johnson had a problem with.
Yeah, and there's another thing too. We especially for the anti-war right, who are against any kind of intervention. I think the reason why they're a little bit quiet in regards to the outrage about the troop escalation is because I don't think they really know how to respond to protesting, or either that being seen with other anti-war protesters who are predominantly in the left or in the center. And I don't think they really want to be associated with a lot of these groups, because a lot of the protests that we've covered here at Heartlands Media, they're democratic socialists, they're environmentalists, they're Democrats, independents, Green Party, the whole anti-war left. And for the anti-war right, a lot of those people also clash with their ideology, and I don't think they really know how to really move in onto the anti-war conversation.
It's sort of at odds with the optics of sort of the nationalistic, patriotic conservative, right? It's at odds with that, and I think they don't. Yeah, you're very right. They don't know how to voice that opinion.
This is the issue of people not talking to each other, and they have to talk to each other in order for something to get done. And hopefully there will be a larger anti-war movement, but it's going to take time before people decide to truly rally together.
Mm-hmm. And in some cases, the Breitbart crew has also been fed with a stream of libertarianism as well, not just paleocon, but also the libertarian position, which is generally speaking anti-war. The difference, though, is that the libertarian position has always been open borders, open markets. Yeah. So, in fact, no, there isn't trade protectionism. There isn't America first. There isn't, there's an openness to immigration. And hey, okay, you've got minerals over there and poppies over there. Okay, we have timber over here. Let's strike a deal. So there's more than just one thread in anti-war conservatism. There is that paleo-conservatism, but there's also the libertarian conservatism, which really is starkly, there's some real stark opposition between the two threads, but they both come to an anti-war position.
I can say from all the people we've covered, it's one thing I've learned is I'm just amazed at how many different types of layer cake, in a sense, there are of these arguments. You have the left argument. You have many different groups, many different variants of anti-war, and you have a few technically be like the neoliberals that are pro-war. And on the right, there's many different ways, like Lanny was saying. If there's one thing to take away as more of a general thing, maybe not even directly related to this, but very important nonetheless, is nothing is ever a stereotype, especially here. And viewing any of these as, the right is just pure pro-war, doesn't do anyone any good because it takes away the actual complexity of reality.
Yeah.
And reality is incredibly complex and incredibly hard to figure out how it's intertwined and how it relates to other parts of reality. But, in our experience working with the libertarians here in Chicago, they're very much against, like Lainey said, the war and what they're doing. And again, they're saying, let's go with open market, free borders. They're very in favor of immigration. It's just they see it as a natural movement, and I feel that in a big way. A lot of these groups that we've covered a lot of people on the left as well. A lot of them have they may have different details on how they want to get things done. Every group seems to have their own set of details and plans, but they all want similar things.
Yeah, exactly it.
I want to point out that those that are sort of vocal hawks disguise it well, end up largely having big mouthpieces on mainstream media, major publications, newspapers, etc., but are very good at keeping their mouth quiet when they're getting their way, but don't need to convince people, and because it's not in the national dialogue. And I want to bring up briefly, we've also had troop escalations this month in Yemen. We don't have a solid number, and the official line is they're there to combat al-Qaeda. But it doesn't look that way externally. We've been aiding Saudi Arabia for months by refueling planes in the area. We've got 4 warships enforcing a blockade on Yemen. And Saudi Arabia is enforcing a land blockade on you can't use the airport anymore in Sana'a, the capital. And the other thing that's really strange about that conflict to me is just a couple months ago, we removed al-Qaeda from a list of official terrorist groups, which was weird, and it seems to have largely been done to kind of combat the fact that the moderate rebel groups in Syria that we were supporting often had, at the very least, loose ties to al-Qaeda. But now we're going in saying we're fighting al-Qaeda, a group that we just removed from the terrorist list. But what it appears is really happening is the House of Saud, right, Saudi Arabia, really doesn't like the Houthis in western Yemen, and they're enforcing a blockade. There's a major cholera outbreak in that region. There's massive hunger. There's food and humanitarian aid cannot get in. These are predominantly women and children and civilians that we're talking about. There isn't much of organized resistance, but this is the Shia population of western Yemen. And the actual capital, eastern Yemen, is Sunni controlled. So the capital is aligned with Saudi Arabia and the United States in enforcing this blockade, and in basically committing genocide against a group of people, which appears to be what we're doing. And perhaps the primary reason you're never going to hear us talk about it on the mainstream news. You're not going to hear the Washington Post or read in the Washington Post anything about it because I don't think you can defend it. At the end of the day, we're aiding and abetting a genocide.
Yeah, and this is our tax dollars at work. See, war, all it does is create more victims, and it's going to create more hatred and more conflict. And if this is something that angers you, if you're listening to us right now, if this is something that angers you, this is your tax dollars that is being used. I don't think any person walking in Chicago or in any part of America want to know that their tax dollars are being used to help commit a genocide. So if this angers you, if you want to get involved, find out where your local find out where your elected official in Washington, D.C., where they stand on this, and call them up and tell them, voice your opinion, or either that, if there's going to be election, find out about the candidates who are running and their stance on our intervention into all these foreign countries. We can stop this, but it's going to require all of you to stand up to do the right thing. So get informed, and let's try and build a better future.
I want to add also how interesting it is that, remember a few months ago when, although it's not been conclusively proven, the government said Syria used sarin gas, and that was a huge issue because it's a chemical weapon, and you can't ever use chemical weapons, it's horrible. Well, we've been supplying Saudi Arabia with white phosphorus, which is in the same category of chemical weapon, which is technically supposed to only be used for signaling purposes, but they're burning, villages with it. Yeah, that's okay. And like Paul said, it's okay when we commit or aid genocide because might makes right, and we're making a good amount of money off of it. So,
well, we've used the white phosphorus too. I mean, in both Raqqa and Mosul multiple times over the last couple of years. Raqqa, I think, was the most recent.
But we're the peacekeeping force, so it's okay.
Right. So we just need to kill some civilians to keep the peace with all of our good humanitarian white phosphorus chemical weapons. That's what we need to do.
And we wonder why people don't like us when we kill, like, for example, with our drone strikes, 90% civilians.
What happened? There used to be anti-war protests, and everyone is caught up in resist Trump and all these other things. The anti-war, but even in the Obama years, there were the anti-war. It was very quiet. What happened? Where's the marching? Where are the protests? Why aren't we mad enough?
You know what it is? There's a couple of variables that are being put in. One, people just don't have time. They're working 2 or 3 jobs, or they're severely unemployed. Another thing is that they're taking care of their kids. There's a lot of issues in regard to which people just can't mobilize like they did in the 1960s. Plus, how many Americans really know a service member or servicewoman in the armed forces, in their families or their near friends? A lot of Americans, back in the day, during Vietnam, there was a draft force. Now we have a volunteer force, and very few Americans know an active military person or a veteran, and so it's not affecting their lives. It's not affecting their livelihood. Now, of course, when they find out where their tax dollars are going towards, of course they might get upset. But was that enough to really get people to mobilize? It should, but the environment now is a lot different than the environment in the 1960s for the Vietnam War. And, you got to remember, too, even the guys coming back, the Vietnam veterans, a lot of those guys were draftees, and they were basically cast aside as soon as they were trying to reintegrate into society. And now what do we see in football games or baseball games? You see our troops being paraded and honored. Respect the troops, respect the troops.
Jets flying over, giant flags.
Yeah, giant
flags. I can't
flags.
believe Colin Kaepernick's kneeling. Show your patriotism.
Yeah, show your patriotism. No one's being affected. There aren't the big. My grandpa, who was a kid during World War II, he used to doing paper routes down the street, and how he would see all the gold star houses, and those gold stars signified somebody died overseas in Germany or in Italy, North Africa, or somewhere in the South Pacific. It's not affecting us. We don't know a dead we don't know someone who's died over there or who's wounded or is actively serving.
They
right
don't
now.
show troop coffins coming back from overseas anymore. I think there's actually a law that says that they can't show that on the news.
No,
we actively want to just brush it under the rug. Don't talk about
war is exciting and good for ratings, but you don't want to show the true cost of war, and that's why and back to your point, that's why I think the anti-war movement isn't as active or isn't as loud as it should be.
There are a lot of people that don't even know we're at war with Afghanistan.
Yeah, and even the people in Afghanistan, some villages, they don't know why we're there.
I remember 90% have no idea why we invaded them to start with. To them, they've always, through their country's history, dealt with big empires invading them, and we're just another big empire invading them.
Well, it's hard to even say why we're invading because there's the official story, then there's the whole host of speculation behind why we invaded them. Because the official story, are we really? Why are we still there? We're still there.
We got Osama bin Laden. He's gone. He was in Pakistan.
Yeah, the Taliban. That's why there's some other reason we're there. Official story is a little
freedom.
muddled.
We got to spread freedom.
Right.
And another thing that you're mentioning that we don't necessarily know service members, we don't see as much. One thing to keep in mind is that according to NPR, in back last year, $67 million in food stamps was used at military commissaries. There are many people in the military who do qualify for food stamps and food assistance.
I didn't know that.
Yes, this is a serious issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's important that when we consider that we're asking people to risk their lives or to be ready to risk their lives at a moment's notice, and their families, that are offering them support, and many of these people are not making enough that they don't qualify for food stamps.
Yeah, the poor fight the wars for the rich.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
And
look, and as a former service member, there's I was fortunate enough, I guess, maybe not to be married at the time. So I basically I could get my lunches and dinners over there at the chow hall and get the food there. But taking care of a family, a wife, a house, it's very taxing, and we don't get paid that much. Your service members don't get paid. Now, there's a lot of money investment into the heavy artillery and the tanks and the missiles, but for the actual person, the soldier, a man or a woman who's walking down the road where the IEDs are at or where they could get popped by a sniper, they don't get paid a lot of money, folks.
I remember, I don't remember exactly what the number is, but I remember it being something ridiculous. Like, you're paid $25,000 as a soldier, but like the amount of equipment surrounding you is like $20 million or something. I don't know the exact number.
I think it's like $100,000 or maybe $200,000.
But I think if you include that, not just like directly on you, but everything surrounding you.
Okay, well then, yeah, of course, but that's including a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying it's crazy that we pay people so little, yet supply them so much.
Yeah.
I think we're touching on an interesting thing. A lot of the times, arguments for whether you're a hawk or a dove, right? The arguments around war center on the cost to America, of American lives, cost to the American taxpayer, and it's never really directed at what we're inflicting elsewhere. Like, that's the kind of the rhetorical argument. I don't want to see more boots on the ground. How about you just not want to see more drones in the air? How about we just not want to see more civilians killed? I don't want to see us become we already are the most hated country in the world for our bullying.
I think that's an excellent point. And while certainly it's normal to look around us and be more concerned with those who are closest to us, who look like us, the reality is that there is just absolute horror in the countries that are being targeted for military action. In the U.S., we really haven't seen war here on the ground.
It hasn't come to our shores.
It hasn't come to our shores. We don't know the terror of waking up at 3 a.m. to an air raid siren.
Or having a whole squadron of tanks roll down Michigan Avenue. I mean, can you imagine seeing something like that? That would be a nightmare.
Or even maybe more, just doing your thing and all of a sudden the block next to you is gone.
Yeah.
With no warning.
And having to live with that, and you having to make that choice every day. Do I go on just living my life knowing that everything could change in an instant? And that which is true for all of us, of course. But it's a lot more likely to happen if you're in a country that's being targeted for military action.
Yeah. It's what was it? The F-22A. I believe that's the right one that we've spent trillions and trillions of dollars on.
The F-35?
It's the F-35. Yeah. Okay. Well, I remember just as a way to put it, we've surrendered 20 years. We with the money we have used developing that plane, which doesn't work, can't fly at night, has a litany of issues that make it combat ineffective.
The pilots that have flown it actually had physical damage to their brains due to lack of oxygen.
The helmet itself that they're wearing is $500,000 just for the helmet. We could have paid for 20 years of college tuition for every American.
that helmet costs more than a Ferrari.
We need that helmet. We need that plane, Daniel. Stop it.
Exactly.
All right, guys. We'll be definitely keeping up with this story, which is never ending, apparently.
Yep, by design.
And so we're going to be taking our break. When we come back, we're going to have some interesting stories about the fallout for journalists and doxing after Charlottesville. We're also going to be talking about just what kind of control does your employer have over your life. We're going to look at a couple of cases that have come up recently. So stay tuned, Paul. I think we got some music for everybody, and we're looking forward to it. And we'll be back in a few minutes. And we're back. So last week, of course, we talked a lot about Charlottesville and what happened there. And there's, of course, now the aftermath of that. One of the ongoing issues that we have had for quite some time now is the issue of so-called fake news, people, just dismissing what they see before their very eyes, saying that this is not accurate, this is not real, this is not what's actually happening, there's an alternative explanation for it. This has been going on for a while, and it's a well-known cognitive bias. It's the way our brains work. but it's kind of happened now to the nth degree. And recently there was an article by in Politico by a fellow who took one of the videos of the horrendous car ramming attack that happened in Charlottesville that injured 19, 20 people and killed a woman.
Heather Heyer.
Heather Heyer. And the man who took this, he shared the video, but then he came under attack by certain right-wingers and conspiracy theorists who accused this all of being a George Soros funded plot, and they began to go after him. They began to go after his family, and his family was getting death threats. They were getting white powders in the mail. The local police department, got involved and were very concerned. His parents decided to take things in stride, but they did. He said, went out to their garden and brought the tomatoes in because they didn't want Nazis to get their tomatoes. As he said, there are limits to even Southern hospitality. So this just brings up so many issues right now. Is what do you do at a time when people don't believe what they are seeing, that don't believe not only so-called corporate media, but media that generally speaking has a reputation for not making up stories out of whole cloth. There may be some selection in what stories they report, and there may be a certain bias, but they don't generally make things up out of whole cloth. What do you do at this point in history when you have people who don't want to believe what they've seen before in their very eyes and are coming up with really implausible explanations, and then going after individuals? In this case, you had this doxing took place. Somebody put up a video, his and they went after his family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've kind of touched on this in the past, and it's if you have a news source or sources, for example, that aren't trusted, and corporate media is not trusted. It is not seen as and more every time this question's asked of the American people through polls. They're trusted less and less. Their authority is less and less relevant. If you, in a sense, it goes to what it means to maintain a country. If you have, even going to the whole talk of Russia that keeps happening, if you don't command respect, trust, and everything that you need to be a media company, if people don't believe you and you're the central source that disseminates information for people to take in, what does it do to people when they feel they can't trust? In this case, we're talking about something very specific where a guy is filming, and now, as a result, there has to be a reason why he's doing it because it doesn't fit my theory on how the world works. So instead of changing my theory based on evidence, I'm going to change the evidence to fit my theory, which is what happened here. What does that say about the strength of the media that can happen? Because I know many years ago that wasn't the case. The media, like the days of Walter Cronkite, the media was trusted heavily, and now you have such a fracturing of media throughout the country that everyone's getting or a small group of people are getting the news from this website, this other group is getting it from this website. None of those guys are communicating together. Everyone's getting their news from 1,000 different places that say 1,000 different things. This is just, to me, it just seems like a natural outcome based on a collapse of trust of what was normally trusted, and now that people don't trust media the way that they used to, they're going elsewhere, and they can't. And because the media that they've listened to that they couldn't trust has taught them, and in general, we don't teach Americans how to differentiate fake news from not fake news, to tell when someone's exaggerating, how to double-check sources. That's something, it's like...
Corporate media can't do that.
When's the last time we even teach our kids how to balance a checkbook or pay taxes or know how to calculate that? That a huge segment of what it means to be a person is never taught, it's never learned, and the parents have the same thing because they weren't taught it as well. Again, to me, this just seems natural.
Just to add on to what Daniel was talking about, losing trust. Remember, but even before 2016, corporate media was falling down. The best example would be when CNN did a continuous coverage on that airline that disappeared in the Indian Ocean for 2 months now?
Do you think a black hole could have done this? I'm Don Lemon.
That's how stupid that kind of coverage was. But let's look at 2016, which I think was the straw that broke the camel's back. Look, the corporate media didn't cover Bernie Sanders. They didn't cover the independents like Gary Johnson or Jill Stein. And when it came down to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, they got the most coverage. In fact, Donald Trump's podium got more coverage than I think maybe Donald Trump did. It's ridiculous to what corporate media was willing to do. And to quote CBS's president, he is the one who said, Trump is bad for America, but he's great for ratings for CBS because they were constantly giving him coverage.
And to go into really how this ties into this story, especially where this guy is being doxxed and everyone believes he's several different forms of fake. If you've been taught, and especially because of a lot of alternate media that's out there, it has been around there for a while. And if people lose faith in corporate media, which most people have, and they go to those sites and they can't tell a site that makes up everything or exaggerates or whatever, if you have enough people that have been told for many years that anything you hear on corporate news is a lie, think the opposite of, and they trust that source, and they don't trust, that's what they're going to do. So when you have corporate media saying something that's true, like, hey, here's a guy who was at this protest and showed that this guy plowed in, because the narrative before that video came out was, he was probably surrounded by protesters. That's the protester law. Because if you run over someone in that situation, it's not illegal. This video disproved that. So therefore, because the corporate media is doing that, they're probably doing it for a reason to build up this false consensus, so we must believe the opposite. And so you have that kind of thought process going through so many millions of people's heads. So they also reach the same conclusion that this guy must be someone from George Soros or something else, but it can't be real because it's being covered and it's against me by a company I don't like. This is just a natural result of all this different media and no true person or group able to speak.
What company was he writing for?
Politico.
Okay, Politico.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's certainly that. I also will say that, at least from my own perspective, I remember when a lot of this technology first became available. I remember for the first time, and this was probably in '92, seeing photo editing software and seeing, the possibility of video editing software, and realizing, well, maybe there's going to become a time where I'm not necessarily going to be able to distinguish what I'm seeing. So that was planted in there. And so I can understand that there was that sense of suspicion, because it's true. I mean, things can be edited, but this was there were multiple videos from that, from there. There was multiple eyewitnesses going on all at that time. And yet we've seen what happened here. And we've also got this added issue of the doxing. Now the doxing did happen in one case where you had some groups that were putting up pictures of the alt-right protesters, the Nazis, the white supremacists, and saying, can you identify this person? In many cases, they got the right person. In one case, they got the wrong person, who was a university professor who was nowhere near this march. And they went after this guy. So,
yeah, the professor was Kyle Quinn from the University of Arkansas. He did look remarkably like the guy in the photo.
He had a doppelganger?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Like, if you look at the side-by-side photos, they do look alike, but at the same time, without any proof, without anything, the internet turned on him. And after repeated, he had to, on Twitter, just people destroying him, people going on social media, threatening him, calling the school. And after repeat, he's like, proof. He's like, I was not there. Here are literally photos, or here are literally me with other university staff. I was in Arkansas. I was nowhere near it. People still, to this day, people are still attacking this guy. Like, it's such a jump to conclusions. In fact, if you find this subject fascinating, there's a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson that is absolutely brilliant about this entire subject, about people getting their lives completely destroyed when the internet basically as a whole kind of turns on them.
And let's not also forget, too, that there have been some occasions where there have been some fake Facebook profiles that have been set up of innocent individuals, and those fake profiles would say, I support this kind of fascist kind of thing, or it has some real hate talk, and then the victim is like, this is not my real Facebook page. This is my real Facebook page. I don't know who set this up. Even then, they're still being attacked, and it's terrible. It can happen to anyone, and it's really a devastating issue. So, good point, Fernando.
I think with regard to this, what news sources can you trust? Can you trust what you read from anywhere, whether it's mainstream or not? And how that ends up, confirming your sort of core beliefs, whether or not what you're looking at is true or false. A lot of people will point back to the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that Bill Clinton signed into law that basically allowed corporate companies to eat up all of these major news outlets. And people talk about now we're in a place where 95% of the news in the United States is owned by 6 companies. That's a big problem for confidence in news media, and it leads to that.
Yeah, and it's not even that there's 6 companies to a large extent. It's that these are now 6 companies that are the media arms of larger companies. So you have MSN is the media arm of Comcast, everything of that nature. So it's everything we've been saying. It's just a very complicated thing to try and describe how a series of events that have taken place over a number of decades, coupled with new technology and change of how gatekeepers are classified, has led to a scenario that we live in the U.S. where you can read an article, and like for me, intrinsically, when I read an article, I never take it at its word because I'm always in the back of my mind saying, is this wrong? Did they miss something? Did they get the context right? Did they get all the context? I'll read it in a few different places. And even then, I have some issue trying to figure out if it's true or not, because I always want to be very careful what I do believe. And actually, Stephen Colbert had that great word he created, truthiness, which is what this is for a lot of people, that they're not, like, everyone here that's sitting at this table, we eat, breathe, sleep this politics. We are used to finding BS. It's what we, in a sense, live for to a big extent, is to try and parse it out and then say it or show it through it, whatever it may be.
Try to come as close to reality as we can.
Yeah, but there's so many people around us that they don't have that kind of time. They don't have that kind of learning. They don't have that kind of training. They don't have the right...
Or the level of interest.
So when they hear like Alex Jones say something and they've not heard it from anywhere else, I'm sure that for a lot of these places that the video came out, these people have never seen the video. They've just had a commentator from some site say that the video is fake without ever showing it. So even though we've seen the video, think of how many people are convinced the video is fake that haven't actually seen it.
If there's one caveat to take away from this, is that sooner or later people are going to have to find out whether or not what they're seeing on the video or reading an article is truthful or not, and they have to check other sources and other sites. And that's what the power of independent media should be, and that's where I think the future of media and journalism is going to lead to, where there are other credible sources and sites that are actually really covering the story and talking about it or bringing it into light, and that's a job of the individual citizen to get informed. See, right now, corporate media, its job is to make people afraid and sensationalize stories, and then make them pacify with some sort of cute animal story or something like that. And that's only going to hold for so long until people turn away from that, and eventually people look to where they can actually find the news that's affecting them under a daily basis. Like, look at the stories that we've covered on Hardlands Media alone. Very rarely have I seen corporate media go to these protests or to these community activist groups or to these forums about our health or our economy or our environment. So it's something that independent media will fill in for, and it's up to them people then to really get themselves to get informed. This is going to take time for that to happen, but it doesn't surprise me that there's stuff like this that's happening now, and it's an issue.
And it even goes to the way that we publish all of our stuff that we do when we do interviews. We make a very strong point. We don't cut the video up. We leave it as it is, uncut, to show people that we are showing everything. We're not hiding anything. We're doing everything we can to show out openly that we are going to tell exactly what happened as we saw it. We're not going to cut it up. We're not going to do all these things. We're going to show you what happened as it happened. Because it's important to us that, because there's so much earned paranoia that we want to come across as we're showing you everything. We're not hiding anything from you.
As transparent as we can be.
Thank you. That's exactly it.
By the same token, though, there are other powers that can reinforce some of these conspiracy narratives. Brennan Gilmore, the journalist who was subject to doxing for his publication of this video, points out that, as he puts it in his article, several days later, Texas Representative Louis Gohmert, a sitting U.S. congressman, called for a federal investigation of Charlottesville, alleging that protests were paid for and arranged by forces of evil beyond what normal people can think about as part of a Democratic agenda to make the 2018 midterm elections about race.
Okay, first, hold on. To Louis Gohmert, this is the same guy who has bumbled every single hearing that he's ever done. It's the same guy who doesn't understand how climate change works. And if there's any force of true evil that was there in Charlottesville, it was the neo-Nazis and the Klansmen who were basically saying how Jews will not replace us and how this is a white country. So
yeah,
I mean,
I agree with that, except that this remains a sitting U.S. congressman.
Yeah,
that he is there. He may be all of these things that are extremely problematic, and that most people with thoughts in their heads, any coherent thoughts in their heads, will recognize this. But there are many people who are not, and you're going to have people who are going to believe that an elected official at that level is not going to be blowing smoke.
Well, that's true, but his observation that Democrats want to make 2018 about race, I don't think is wrong. I think very much that Democrats would like to make the midterm and maybe into 2020 about intersectional politics, about, Joe Arpaio and racial profiling, and look at those neo-Nazis, and Trump's a misogynist and a bigot, and all of the right wing is, and that's what we want to make it about. We don't want to talk about ending war. We don't want to talk about legalizing cannabis. We definitely don't want to talk about breaking up banks. We don't want to talk about any of these left issues, but boy, they're racist.
But he's very willing to put forth that point by hooking into this incredibly tragic event that did happen.
Correct.
Yeah, no, it's I've worked with someone in the past that just goes a progressive person for the most part, business owner trying to do things that help a wide swath of people and organizations. She was convinced that what was the school shooting called again? The
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook was an entire fabrication, and there were actors involved.
Oh, she's an Alex Jones fan.
So it's. I mean, everyone can fall for it. When I look at stories, I even if I believe something at a point, I always hold in my head, I could be wrong, because it's very hard to tell what is real. In this case, it's pretty obviously not a staged event, but the fact that someone like that could be so convinced with so little evidence that that's the case of what happened, I think says everything.
I think that, Daniel makes some good points about critical thinking and the willingness to sit back and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to reserve judgment. I'm going to take information in here, and I'm going to, allow this to percolate a bit. But there's also, however, this other instinct that we're seeing in some people, that instinct to go on the attack and the instinct to go doxing. Okay, maybe you're not so sure about this video. You want to wait and see. But why then pursue that individual on social media? Why send white powder to his parents' home and make them take in their tomatoes before the tomatoes are completely ripe? Why do that? There's another instinct here that I'm finding incredibly disturbing. I once had a discussion with somebody who I know to be a sensitive individual who had his doubts about, in this case, Sandy Hook, a situation that I believe is absolutely, there's no question that this happened. But one of the things that I pointed out to him is I said, even if you are trying to be a critical thinker, think about the effect of what you are saying maybe having on people who suffered a loss in that. Are you willing to allow that if it did happen, are you willing to give any benefit of the doubt and consider the fact that you as a private citizen really don't have anything to do with this, and have no real business inflicting pain. And that, I think, calmed him down. But these folks here have no problem with not only disbelieving, but running with that disbelief in the most cruel and threatening way possible. Some of them, I believe, they're sociopaths. This is what they want to do. Others are just lacking self-awareness. Yeah,
again, I go back at the situation where people don't know how to critically think. It's not like, thousands of years ago when we were hunter and gatherers, we didn't have an intrinsic value to differentiate fake news from real news. That's just something that's learned. It's by definition a learned trait in humans. All of these things, all of modern society is a learned thing. It doesn't come naturally to us. We just don't learn it. Again, we don't have time to apply it. People aren't interested. All of these things create this vortex that we are sitting in right now, where a guy filming something can lead to him being doxxed with no evidence except for superstitions and a desire to prove the truthiness of the situation rather than the truth. It's someone had this great quote. It was people would much rather be right than accurate today.
I think it's very difficult for people to admit that they're wrong or they got it wrong. It's them losing face on social media then. But the thing is, if you're going to be reporting the news or covering anything, you have to be prepared for the fact that you might be wrong about something. So that's why it's important to fact check and double check all your sources
and issue corrections when necessary.
And it's one thing I've said to the kid a bunch of times. I love being wrong. Because if I'm right, I gain nothing from being right. I just maintain what I know. If I'm wrong, I learn that something I thought was incorrect, and I can gain a better statement, a better platform to say it.
You improve yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great feeling. And it's something I think everyone should be trained in. I think everyone should enjoy being wrong, because everyone's wrong most of their life on most things until they learn the right thing. So,
to wrap, we're going to be wrapping up in the next few minutes, but I want to put out one other question. What do you think this is? What kind of a chilling effect is this going to have on folks who, for example, do not work for a major media company that can afford to hire a private security firm to monitor emails and that sort of thing? If this is the sort of thing that continues to happen, particularly to freelancers, we've got a few in this group, and for independent groups like ours, the small local stations, what kind of a chilling effect can this have?
The chilling effect is that, of course, there will be the extreme fringe coming out of the woodwork, and I'm not just including the right, but there's also some very extreme left. But if they do come out, they're going to, of course, make their threats. They're going to say everything. But let's look at a positive light. I'm going to quote Jordan Cherry on this. The very first time me and Daniel just got done working with him in East Chicago, and he sent me this via text message. This is a tough career, but you have to be fearless. Be fearless. And that's the one thing I could say to every other freelancer or independent media organization that's just like ours. It's including TYT. That's including Secular Talk, The Tim Black Show, The Jimmy Dore Show. And those are big independent media networks. But for the small networks like Harlan's Media and others, we have to be fearless. We cannot be afraid. We have to be willing to show the truth, bring truth to power. Because if we don't, then we are failing in our social responsibility to do the job that corporate media cannot do. They're not designed to tell the truth. They're not designed to really bring out facts.
I completely agree. You have to be fearless. Back to Laney's question, what do we do? What are the implications of this? Doxxing is not all of that new. Doxxing has been on the uptick for several years. It is absolutely illegal. And there tend to be ramifications if you can track down the person who did the doxing, and you can get some semblance of legal protection or protection from law enforcement when it happens, whether or not you have giant coffers to pay for lawyers and things like that. On some level, we need to both be fearless and be aware that it's a danger of putting yourself out there in any capacity. If you hold an opinion that goes counter to particularly what groups that are very ready to use this type of tactic, if you're going against what they're saying.
I'd like to add that for every danger you play it well, it's always an opportunity. Someone that's that freelance, now he's a household name.
Yeah.
I got to say, as terrible as it is in the short term, if he can successfully pull off a comeback, he can actually come back stronger than he started.
I agree 100%, man.
All right, then. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot more of these stories coming up. So it's kind of an interesting discussion, being here, group of independent media people. You know, what are we prepared to do? What are we prepared to do? But moving on to something else, got some interesting stories this week from the National Law Review involving different areas of employment law. And there were two separate cases, but I felt had they had some segue here. So first of all, a U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia ordered the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, Federal Commission, to reconsider its final regulations on the extent to which an employer may offer incentives to participate in a wellness program. For those of you who are unfamiliar, some companies have as a quote-unquote benefit to employees a wellness program that is connected to their employer-provided health insurance. The wellness program is supposed to be an incentive program for encouraging employees to stay healthy. And there are a variety of ways of participating in these wellness programs, and there's usually some form of incentive. It may be in the form of points that they can, the employee can apply to gift merchandise or gift cards, but there may also be deductions in premiums, apparently. And if you participate in a wellness program, you are voluntarily providing information about your health. And this can range from weigh-ins to putting on a Fitbit, or even, I think in some cases, providing health history or genetic history.
Even family health history.
Yeah, even family health history. And the idea is that we want to encourage the employee to stay healthy, but it also gives the employer and the insurance an awful lot of information about that employee. And apparently there was a case in which an employer, the EEOC said it's okay to offer an incentive if the value does not exceed 30% of the cost of a self-only health insurance policy. So essentially you're saying you can save big on your health insurance if you are willing to provide this information. And now a district court is saying, wait a minute, this may violate American with Disability Act, that this is perhaps violating the employee's privacy rights. So we've got that going on. And at the same time, there was another case out in Minnesota where an employee supposedly violated a non-compete clause. She was working for a self-storage unit company. She left that company. She had signed a non-compete clause. She left that company, went to work for another company, and posted something on LinkedIn about how she had moved to this new company, had this new opportunity, and was looking forward to helping people out. And she was sued, by her previous company. So what we have here are two examples and by the way, the court ruled in favor of her previous employer, or it's looking that way. But we have two examples here of how an employer can, or an ex-employer can really get themselves into an employee's life. One thing that many people have talked about, many labor activists have talked about, is that we already have a lot of employer control over our lives. In almost all states, I believe, other than Montana, but I'm not even sure about that anymore, it's an at-will employment in this country. Your employer can fire you for any reason, unless you are a member of a protected class under anti-discrimination laws. You can be fired, though, for having a political opinion. You can be fired for liking the color green. It's any reason. Any reason. We also, though, are living in a place where people are maybe quoted a salary or quoted a wage for a certain number of hours of work per week, and yet we might spend 1 to 2 hours commuting every day, and we're not paid for that. We're not necessarily being paid for the clothes that we need to wear to work. There's a whole lot of the employer has a lot of fingers in your life. And now here we see, first of all, employers who want to make use of wellness programs, which could be used potentially to discriminate against an employee, maybe even in illegal ways, but that can be very hard to prove. It's really hard to prove in many of these cases that age or disability was a factor in a termination or a failure to promote somebody. And now we have these non-disclosure and these non-compete clauses, which are getting really weird, because you have companies that aren't necessarily working with proprietary technology or anything like that, but they're being asked to not get it, or told, you have to sign this contract that you will not get a job in this industry for a certain amount of time, even after you stop working for us.
So non-compete clauses have been a topic, particularly in Silicon Valley, for many years, and that has some merit. It makes kind of a lot of sense. If you're working on a top secret project for, say, Apple, and then you jump ship and go immediately to work for Microsoft, you have some knowledge of trade secrets and R&D that could definitely be beneficial to a competitor. And you don't want to end up in a situation where employees now are going to go price shopping for who's going to give me the best salary because I got the dirt on this big company's secret R&D project. So I can understand that, but you can't use the same non-compete argument for someone who's making sandwiches at a Jimmy John's to say you can't go work at a different sandwich company for X number of years. What trade secrets do they have? Different kind of roast beef? Are you kidding me? That is, you're talking about fingers getting into the lives of people, and that's where it becomes really nefarious. And some balance needs to be had there. Some class of job with some kind of truly insider valuable knowledge that would be inconvenient to the company. I can kind of understand those merits. They aren't huge. There should be limits to how long you can say non-compete, and there should be restrictions on what fields that applies to.
Yeah, until like Jimmy John's. I actually almost worked at Jimmy John's, and then decided after I read through the contract, I was like, no, I'm not doing this. This is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad I made that choice because from what I remember, if I worked there, I wouldn't be able to work at any place that I think like 10 or 20% of the sales of the place couldn't be in sandwich. It's not like going from Jimmy John's to Subway. I couldn't go from Jimmy John's to Long John Silver's
because they sell sandwiches.
Because they have sandwiches on the menu, and that makes up a double-digit amount. And then you couldn't, and that applies to any place that is within 3 miles of an existing Jimmy John's, which in a city means everywhere. And then that it takes place for 3 years. So if I had options, but if you didn't have options, and you have no marketable skill set, and you're already at a place where you're like, I'm going to work at a sandwich shop. That's as good as I can pull. Well, guess what? Now you're effectively indentured to Jimmy John's, and then that keeps going out because the longer you work at Jimmy John's, the longer that 3 year.
It extends the longer you work.
Well, no, I think it goes until it's when you leave. You can't work at a place for 3 years that sells sandwiches. So if you work there and you're like, I have to go back, then you in a sense resets.
All right. Well, because heaven forbid you accidentally give away Jimmy John's sandwich making skills or secrets, Daniel. How dare you? I
told them about the free smells.
But it's interesting because what you'll hear from people who tend to lean more on the free market side of things. Well, people have their labor; they can market their labor, and to potential employers, and that keeps a balance. Well, clearly there isn't a balance here. First of all, when you have a multi-million-dollar company up against a minimum wage worker, there's an
inherent imbalance.
There's an inherent imbalance here. But also, even in things like this woman who was working for the storage company, she was in sales. Now, the whole thing with sales is, a good salesperson is worth their weight in gold. And everybody knows that because they can really bring in that business. And so the ability to move to another company if they offer you a better deal helps to keep everybody competitive. And in this case, this place had this self-storage place, and I really am trying to figure out what kind of trade secrets must be there.
None. They don't have a special lock.
To kneecap their sales force. So they force the sales force to either stay with them or to, for the next 6 months or whatever it was, to seek employment elsewhere. Now, if you're in the tech industry or you're making a fair amount of money, the idea is maybe you can save up your money, do some sniffing around. Your potential employers will probably have enough advance notice that they can work things out, so your non-compete clause is not going to disturb you too much. But in many industries, no, they want somebody yesterday for this job, and the person may not have that kind of money in savings. So I'm seeing a real balance to the employer here, not a whole lot for the worker who now cannot market their labor effectively.
It's just another example here in the United States where corporations have all the power, all the representation, and all the protections, but the average worker has nothing. And heaven forbid that worker asks for a union, time off, vacation pay, medical leave, or even a savings plan, health care or dental. It's ridiculous because we, as average citizens, working class people, we're being pushed and being denied basic rights, and these corporations that aren't living entities are given everything and bowed by our elected officials that they're what's getting the economy rolling. That's not the issue at all, and it's devastating to see that this is another example happening here in the land of the free.
Well, it's like I've kind of joked about for a while. We live in a state of corporate socialism where if you're a corporation, we'll subsidize everything you do. We'll subsidize your product. We'll subsidize, in some cases, how you market. Through taxes, we're effectively subsidizing you. Through how, for Walmart being the biggest welfare creator in the country, we'll subsidize you there. And then you can privatize all the profits. I mean, I always remember that an average worker at Walmart will make like $17,000 a year or something like that. It might be lower. And then they have then the state will give them another $3,000 through various forms of welfare, that because they're not paid enough. Yet, if you take the profit of Walmart and the revenue of Walmart, you divide it by the number of employees, each of those employees are effectively making the company $80,000. So it's just taking a large chunk of everyone's labor that they do, keeping it for yourself, then ensuring that they can act. So Walmart is a good example. If you unionize your store, they just shut down the store. And that's their response. They would rather shut down the store than have a union controlled staff, because the implication is that they wouldn't be they would lose of that $80,000, they might lose a couple $1,000 that they're already going to make in profit and just have a smaller profit, because they want, in the pie, they want owner equity to be everything. They want, remember, in a big sense, workers are not treated as workers. They're simply another widget that you want to knock down the cost of while maintaining production.
Right, and corporations are specifically designed to earn as much profit as possible. So if a corporation wants to pay its workers less, they'll do so because it's in their profit-driven mindset to earn more profit. And if they want to get involved in their employees' lives to make sure that the trade secrets of the company is protected, they will do so. And it's just it's infringing on our rights. It's infringing on who we are as individual citizens, and nobody deserves to be treated like that. And it's a sad example again of how these corporations get all the respect, all the privileges, everything. Even when they break the law, they're just given a little fine. But if an average citizen would do even a quarter of the frauds or the insecurities or even the amount of damage some of these corporations do, they'd go to jail for the rest of their life.
I want to wrap up going back to the issue of the medical information, and this is it really concerns me because, as I pointed out, it seems to me to be an end run around laws that protect employees who have medical conditions and who need accommodations. A couple of years ago, I even encountered a company that provided in-office medical clinics. The idea was that they would put a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant in the office. And the idea is that employees were urged to go to the in-office clinic for all routine medical needs. And it would, including whether they needed a note to get out of work. And even though that clinic is in a contractual relationship with the business. And one of the things that it brought up, and they said, well, you can't of course force your employees to go to their to go to our clinicians rather than their own doctor. But what you can do is you can optimize the health benefit plan to encourage them to use our clinics. And so you're essentially taking away any independence in a person's management of their own health and handing it over to the employer whose contracted service can make those decisions about whether an employee should be in the office or not. It kind of reminds me a bit of the private prison system, where everything is internal, and then you have states contracting with a private prison system that lobbies for certain bills and has the freedom to do that to keep people back in there, and then they can contract with businesses. It's a lot of very sticky fingers creeping.
It reminds me of those mining towns with the company store.
Absolutely.
That you were always in debt to the company store.
There's, in fact, a wonderful exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry where they actually talk about those mining communities as well as the stores there. I don't know if it's still up or not, but it's about coal and the energy. But they also have a little bit of the history of the coal mining towns and the people affected by it.
With regard to these some medical things within companies, I can't stress enough, I feel like people don't often have an appreciation for the fact that this information imbalance is a really large power imbalance.
Yeah.
It's larger than I think a lot of people will give it credit for. And I think, I guess we mostly talk about that information imbalance when we talk about sort of Big Brother, NSA spying kind of thing. That's the government having basically unlimited information on its citizenry, a major breach of the Fourth Amendment. And that represents a huge disadvantage to individual citizens when wanting to air grievances that we have with our government. But this is the exact same thing in the context of a company, just centered in this case around medical information. That can be used that's great leverage over your employees, even just having that information on your medical history or anything like that, regardless of whether you take advantage of wellness programs or whether you are using these clinics that the company wants you to use. It's the information that's the real leverage, in my opinion.
It really, really is. And it really kind of brings home the fact that when we tell people that they have a responsibility to go out and get a job, and it's their fault if they don't progress in their work or in their career and make more money, there are a lot of powers out there that are trying to stop that kind of progress for some people, and that it makes it a lot more difficult to progress. This is not an even playing field.
Well, there are a lot that would argue that even that type of work is a form of slavery. It's a form of wage slavery.
I'm not going to disagree with you at all.
I think we can all agree on that.
All right. Well, once again, wrapping up the show, we probably have a lot more to say and a lot of different things, a lot of news out there. We're looking forward to next week. It's going to be a great show next week, and we want to remind everybody, this is the tip of the iceberg. You can go over to Hardlands Media on Facebook, like and follow our page, and you'll get notice about our live stream events. We're always live streaming different events here in the city, in the suburbs, and we put up news stories, and we really do appreciate your support. Do like and share our content. We absolutely appreciate it. Also, this show will be available as a podcast within the next couple of days. You can go over to hardlandsmedia.com to get links to all of our accounts, including our Spreaker account, YouTube account, where the podcasts are hosted. So thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great week.